Hello, and thank you for joining me for this look at one of GMT Games' popular tactical level simulation war games. The 17th century was the age of pike and shot, a period which saw a wide variety of arms, armour and troop types, and a century which saw at its conclusion the supplanting of the pike by the musket and bayonet, which was to dominate battlefields for the next 200 years. The GMT's Musket and Pike series features on a tactical level battles from the English Civil War and the 30 Years' War. And Ben Hull has done an excellent job recreating the detail of these battles in a realistic and playable format. And what I'd like to do is illustrate some of the tactical methods which he describes in the series playbooks using the Vassal module created by Knut Gruenet. Now, I was extremely fortunate to get hold of copies of 3 of these titles because I missed them all first time round. I thought, mistakenly as it turned out, that the tactical system would be extremely complex and tortuous and would cause play to become bogged down in minutiae. This despite the fact that I'm passionately interested in the English Civil War and the 30 Years' War. Well, I'm happy to say I was wrong about that, and that I was able to secure copies of 3 of the titles through Noble Knight Games, a company which specialises in retailing out-of-print and out-of-stock games. So now all 3 games sit on my shelf, and I'm very glad of it. Before I kick off, there is no dearth of books on the subject for those wanting to delve into the history behind the games. I'll just mention 3 here, all of which I thoroughly recommend. The 30 Years' War by C.V. Wedgwood is a seminal text and a must-read. Geoffrey Parker's The 30 Years' War is a collection of essays by a number of authors on various aspects of the conflict, and his Europe in Crisis gives an excellent background to the whole century. Osprey Publishing also do a volume on pike and shot tactics. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at some of the methods described in the game's playbook, and in a later video we'll go through a few turns of one of the battles in the series. Now, the standard infantry formation was a pike block flanked by sleeves of musketeers, which would either advance steadily toward an enemy battalion or, if occasion demanded, retire before it. In either case, the musketeers would attempt to maintain a steady rate of fire, discharging their muskets one rank at a time while either advancing or retiring. Now, in the former case, known as fire by introduction, each rank would fire, then the rank behind would move forward to take its place, the process being repeated until, with 6 ranks having performed this operation in succession, the first rank would have reloaded and be ready to fire again. This also meant that the musketeers would keep pace with the advancing pike block. Now, in the latter case, known as fire by extraduction, the first rank of musketeers would fire, then retire to the rear, exposing the second rank, which would fire and do likewise. In this way, the musketeers would be able to retire at the same pace as the pike block, while still firing. 6 ranks being considered the optimum formation to allow a musketeer to reload. Now let's see how this is dealt with in the game. Now, the infantry formations are represented by a pike and shot unit, these 2 having battalion guns attached. The number in the white box is the unit's current strength, the number in the red box its current morale. Now, in this example, the Swedish battalion decides to charge the Imperialists. They move 2 hexes into contact and can gain the benefit of a +1 in combat through momentum. However, they cannot fire, because to do so means they would have to advance only 1 hex, as per the fire by introduction I described a moment ago. referred to in the game as advancing fire. The defenders can use salve fire, allowing them to mass all 6 ranks into 3 close order ranks and fire as one body. This is denoted by a salvo marker and has more of a psychological rather than a physical impact, reflected by the fact that the attacker now has to test morale for taking salvo fire. In this example, the attacker has taken 2 hits and a formation drop, but because its morale is currently 8, denoting an elite unit, it passes. In the ensuing combat, the attacker gains +1 for momentum and +1 for being 1 morale level higher than its opponent, but loses -1 for being formation broken. The die roll of 3 results in attacker morale shaken. A marker is placed, the unit retreats 2 hexes, and both units suffer a formation drop due to combat. The Swedes are now shaken and formation broken. Let's take an alternative approach. We'll assume the Swedes will use fire by introduction and advance cautiously. In the final approach, they advance 1 hex, so can use advancing fire. However, the defender still gets to go first, using salvo fire as before. They consult the fire tables using salvo, column and regimental guns, and get a 3, inflicting 1 hit. The attacker passes its morale test and now uses the advancing fire. It also has a battalion gun, but gets a -3 modifier because it's firing by introduction and therefore not able to bring the full weight of its firepower to bear. Nevertheless, it also inflicts a hit, but the defender does not have to test. Now the defenders could fire a second time as reaction fire, but would get a -1 for already having used salvo, and there would be no morale test for the attacker on this occasion. The Swedes can now opt to launch straight into hand-to-hand combat, known as push of Pike, or wait until next turn when they can use their salvo fire before the Imperialists. We'll assume that both sides decide to engage in a firefight on the next turn. At point-blank range, the Swedes use salvo fire with their battalion gun. They inflict 2 hits and a formation drop. Now, the Imperialists must now test. They have 2 occasions to test. 1 in reaction to salvo fire, and 2 because with a base morale of 7, they have taken 2 hits. They roll 1 die, but add +1 for each case after the first. They roll a 7, which is equal to or less than their morale, so they pass the first case, but with +1 added, they fail the second case and become shaken. They now return salvo fire, but with a -2 for being formation shaken, and a -1 because they are a double hex unit, having taken 2 hits. The result, they inflict 1 hit. The Swedes now seize the opportunity to launch hand-to-hand combat, in which they will have a decided advantage. Firstly, they get +2 for the morale differential. That's morale of 8 versus the opponent's 7, now reduced to 6. They get +1 for having just fired a salvo, and they get another +1 because the defender is formation shaken. The total is +4, which, incidentally, is the maximum modifier able to be applied to any combat. The die roll is a modest 3, but with 4 added it's 7. The result, defender morale broken. The Imperialists are routed, and the Swedes must enter the vacated hex, taking a formation drop as a result of combat. Now, we'll take a look at some examples of cavalry combat now. There were several types of mounted soldier, including irregulars and dragoons, but I'm going to focus on two of them, the cuirassier and the arquebusier. And the cuirassier was the more heavily armed of the two, often wearing armour, who relied on a brace of pistols and a sword, and they were used in one of two ways, either as pistoliers, firing by rotation, known as the caracole, or as shock cavalry, charging with the sword. Now, the former method was favoured for a long time during the 17th century, but the likes of Gustav Adolf, King of Sweden, and Prince Rupert during the English Civil Wars, they favoured the shock approach, which gradually gained ascendancy. The arquebusier was the more lightly armed and relied on a short musket called arquebus or carbine, which was used to skirmish and harry opposing foot and horse. Now, in the game we can see these units represented here. The letter A denoting an arquebusier, who receives a +1 modifier when firing, but a negative modifier if in close combat with a more heavily armed opponent. Now, the strength of a unit is important in fire combat because cavalry need a 7 to hit, and the die is modified by +1 for every strength point greater than 3 and -1 for every point less than 3. So you can see here in these examples that the Spanish cavalry on the left would hit on a 5, the Swedish unit on a 6, and the Bavarian arquebusier on a 4. Now, in this example, the Swedish cavalry intends to attack the Spanish unit on the left. However, as the attacker is within 4 hexes, there is the possibility that either opponent could test to intercept, which would mean they would gain the attacking initiative if successful. No interception occurs. The Swedes attack, and because they are moving straight ahead at least 2 hexes, they can use momentum, which would give them a +2 in combat. However, the Spanish unit elects to receive the attack at the halt and fire its pistols, needing 5 or more to inflict a hit. A hit is inflicted, and because the Swedish unit is only a morale of 6, it must test because it has received at least 1 hit. Worse, though, it has also reached its casualty threshold, which for a morale 6 and strength 4 unit is only 1 hit. Its morale is automatically reduced to 5. It then fails its test and is shaken. However, because it's already shaken, this converts to a rout. If instead the Swedish squadron chooses not to charge, it too can use its pistols, with the defender going first. Then, if close combat follows, both units can use their remaining pistols, but this time no hits are inflicted. Instead, both sides gain a +1 combat modifier for using pistols in close combat. Now, in this example, we see a flanking attack, which gains a +1 modifier for each flank or rear hex occupied. However, here, the defender is able to react by rotating to face both attackers, thus avoiding a flank attack and only having to receive a frontal attack. Finally, an effective tactic, which is important to use in the game, was to have at least 2 lines of cavalry, so that as the first line became disrupted in combat, squadrons in the second line could follow up and take advantage of already disordered opponents. In the game, this is simulated by the fact that every unit receives a formation hit or drop after a combat, and a consequent reduction of -1 in future combat. As you can see here, the 2 fresh squadrons will be able to enter the next round, perhaps even launching a flank attack. Well, that's my look at some of the game mechanics. Next time I'd like to look more closely at one of the battles in the series, the Battle of Nordlingen. So until then, bye for now, and as always, thank you very much for watching.